wrote a new review about 8 years ago, and we got it out of Kuba. So that was called by an investor who in turn sold it to the Salvation Army. And that's where the Salvation Army is.
Blessed be all who enter. The Holocaust is the darkest age in mankind's history. Whatever human rights violations and persecution we know exists today in our so-called modern world utterly pales in comparison to the premeditated and calculated annihilation of innocence, families torn apart, the pain of which cannot be fathomed. The value of human life is held precious by all civilized peoples. We must ask ourselves, what happened to turn the tide so forcefully during those long years of unthinkable horrors? What happened to allow man to turn to what can only be described as satanic in his mission to destroy and cause untold suffering to his fellow man? What happened to the social conscience of good people that we would hope would be the voice of reason in combating the insanity that underscores what we have come to know as the Holocaust? How could such tragedy and inhumanity continue for so long? What misery did countless men, women, and children suffer? And what pain yet lingers amongst the tortured souls who have been lost to us, and those who yet live with these memories? And yet, remarkably, there are today revisionists who claim that it never happened, that it is a hoax, propaganda, fantasy, and there are those who feel that it should have happened and are glad for it. We are responsible to disseminate the truth, however difficult it is to bear. With the passage of time, eyewitnesses to these tragedies and survivors become fewer. They carry their tales to their ends, and we must listen. It is up to us to grapple with the darker side of humanity and not to deny what is real, however painful it is. We must heed this solemn testimony for generations to come. But above all else, we must be hopeful. There is in our liturgy the following: Lo yisagoy el goy cherev, lo yilmedu od milchama. Let us pray and work for the day when there shall be no violence or desolation on earth, when nation shall not lift up sword against nation, nor shall they learn war anymore. What happened then must never happen again to anyone. Shalom, may we all live in peace. I'd like to now introduce Susan Lazaroff, the president of our sisterhood, who will introduce the Becks, whom we are privileged to have today.
I'd like to welcome everyone to Temple Bethel and thank you all for coming. Today we will hear the story of Helen and Kuba Beck and their experiences during the Holocaust. This is the last generation that will be able to hear first-hand accounts from survivors. I believe it is the moral obligation of all of us to the 6 million who died to repeat the story that we hear today to our children and our grandchildren so that a Holocaust can never again happen. Because Helen and Kuba did not meet until after the war, they'll be giving their accounts separately. First Kuba and then Helen. Afterwards there'll be a question and answer period. Without any further delay, I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Kuba Beck.
Thank you. I will tell you what happened to me during the Second World War. I was born in Poland, in the city of Krakow. I was 17 years old when the war broke out on September 1, 1939. I was living with my parents, and I had two brothers. One was 2 years older, one was 7 years younger. Right from the beginning, when the Nazis occupied Poland, the problem started right away for the Jewish people. Number one, we had to be identified by wearing an armband with the star on it. And this had a purpose, because when you walk the streets, anytime the Nazi or German wanted, he could harass you, and they did quite a bit. There was catching, because you were identified. If the Nazis needed some work to be done in the barracks, they were catching Jewish people on the streets, like today the dog catchers are catching dogs. They were taking them to the barracks, they were performing all kind of dirty work, and they were sent home. Conditions were getting worse and worse by the hours. The Jewish homes were also open for the Nazis. The Nazi could come in any home and help themselves for what they wanted. I remember they came to our house. We had a radio, big radio. They took it away. We had a lot of silver, and they took it away, and you couldn't say anything. All schools were closed for the Jewish children. I just finished high school in June and was ready to go to college in September. However, there was no school for Jewish children. So what I had to do, I was helping my parents in the store. My father had a paint and hardware store, and I was helping in the store. Didn't take long, because in 1940, one of the Nazis came to the store presented a paper, told my parents that he's taking over the store. At that time, right from the beginning, many Nazis were coming to Poland in order to take over Jewish businesses. He was one of them, like Schindler. Schindler came at the same time also to Krakow to take over some business and make money. Well, when he took over our business, there was no room for me to be there, so I had to find some other job, something to do, because otherwise the Nazis would take me to some labor camp. So what I did, I found a job in a factory to be a machinist apprentice in a machine shop. However, didn't take long, because in 1941, the Nazis decided Krakow was a beautiful city and also became a capital of the occupied Poland. And Jews were living all over the city, and there was a Jewish section, but there was no ghetto. The Nazis decided they don't want to have any Jews in Krakow, so what they did in the main city, I'm talking about the main city, they took a section from the city, they ordered all the non-Jews to move out from the section, they closed this section up by putting barbed wires, and some windows were even blocked up with bricks, and there were only 2 gates, and all the Jews from Krakow and surrounding communities had to move into the section. Conditions were very bad, because first of all, there was not enough room for everybody to have an apartment. So if you had a large room, sometimes you had more than 2 or 3 families living in one room. It just happened that the section where we lived, where I was born, we lived, and my father's business that's the section where the ghetto was established. So actually, we didn't go to the ghetto, but the ghetto came to us. we had a big apartment. We had to bring in some relatives or friends, and they lived with us together because we had to share the apartment. They established some shops in the ghetto, and all the work had to be performed for the Nazis. So they had like a shoe factory, they had the factory of uniforms, there were some metal shops, there was some woodworking shop, and people were working. However, my job was on the outside of the ghetto. So every morning I was going out, and in the evening I had to come back. It made it a little bit easier for my family because going out from the ghetto, I still had contact with some non-Jewish people, and I could buy some food, and I was smuggling in once in a while some food into the ghetto. However, this was a very risky operation because if I would be caught, I wouldn't be here today to talk to you because everybody, all the people who were caught were executed right on the spot. In 1942, the Nazis decided that the ghetto, they don't want Jews in the ghetto. Well, I'm sorry. 1942 was first, they decided the ghetto is overcrowded and there's not enough work for everybody. So under the pretext that they're going to establish a selection and take some people out from the ghetto and send them out to some other location, and they will be working over there. They will establish shops. They will be taking care of it. And that's the way they're going to reduce the population of the ghetto. So what they did, they established a selection. And if you saw the movie Schindler's List, you even saw one of the selections where a table was set up. Behind the table was an assessment, and everybody in the ghetto had an ID card and had to report before the Nazi. He asked you a few questions, and if he decided that you're going to stay in the ghetto, he gave you a stamp on the ID card. If he decided that not, you're going to be resettled, he didn't give you. I came before the Nazis, and he asked me very few simple questions. Where are you working? What are you doing? And I told him I'm a machinist. I'm working in this factory. And without no problem, I got the stamp on my ID card. However, my parents and my brothers, they didn't get the stamp. And you cannot imagine the Nazis' propaganda and how people believe the Nazis, what they were preaching. They would make it so easy. They would say, don't worry, nothing will happen, you will be just resettled. After this selection, I still remember talking to my parents. I said, look, you didn't get your stamp, I got my stamp. Why don't I join you and I'm gonna go together with you, we'll be all together. But no, my parents insisted that I should stay in the ghetto because their explanation was, look, they're gonna send us to some other camp, we're gonna be working over there, and maybe you will still have some opportunity to have contact because we did have some non-Jewish friends. You're gonna have an opportunity, we had quite a bit money, not only Polish money, but other jewelry, you'll be able to bribe and maybe you'll be able to help us out. So why don't you stay in the ghetto and we'll be going, we'll find out where we are, that's gonna be everything. All right, and second thing, they said, who knows, the war will be lasting maybe another few months, it'll be all over and everything will come back to normal. But boy, this didn't happen like this. Because one day, when I went to work, as usually I went out of the ghetto, during the day, the Nazis closed the ghetto, surrounded with SS, with machine guns, and ordered all the people without a stamp on the ID cards to report to 1 square. There were trucks waiting for them. They were loaded on the trucks and they were taken to a railroad station. They were loaded in cattle cars and they were sent away. When I came from work this evening, that's the last time I saw my family. This was a big lie, whatever they were talking. We didn't know for quite a while what actually happened. There were 3 transports sent like this away from the ghetto. After a few weeks, I still having contact with not Jewish people. I had a very close friend, and I asked him, would you do me a favor and go and follow the tracks where the transport went? Maybe you can find out where they are, because maybe they need some help. And he did. He left, he went and followed the tracks, and he came to a small town which was about 300 miles away from Krakow, and he was told, you see, that's the railroad station, and from the railroad station there are side tracks going into the forest. All the transport are going into the forest, and empty cattle cars are coming out. Nobody comes out from there. Well, this didn't sound good at all. I had an idea what happened. However, I can say after the war we found out actually that this was one of the extermination camps by the name of Belzec, and in this camp, in 1 year, they killed million Jewish people. There was a plan to establish a soap factory in this camp to make soap from human fat. Didn't work out, and that's the reason after 1 year they liquidated. Well, being alone, my life still had to go on. We still were hoping that maybe someday we'll be reunited, somebody will come back. I was working still in this factory. However, on March 13, 1943, the Nazis decided that all Krakow has to be free of Jews. They're going to liquidate the ghetto. And what they did, they established a concentration camp on the Jewish cemetery in Krakow. Outside of the city, about 5 miles outside of the city, was a big Jewish cemetery where my grandparents and other members of my family were buried. What the Nazis did, they took over the cemetery, they turned over the tombstone, they broke them down into pieces, and the most expensive stones, and I can tell you there were many of them with marbles, the Nazis took in Germany because they said someday when they're going to win the war, they're going to build a victory monument from those tombstones. Right on the sides, on the grave sites, they built barracks, they built some shops, and that's where we were housed, and that's where we were working. Again, I will refer to the movie, because if you watch the movie, you could see the liquidation of Krakow ghetto, because Spielberg did an excellent job, tried to show it. But whatever he showed, there was a lot worse than actually happened. Because what actually happened is that some group of people were sent from the ghetto to this camp, and the rest were ordered to go on 1 square. Machine guns were set up, and they were all killed. There were a few thousand people killed right on a square. The hospitals, where even there was a nursery, newborn babies, I don't want to go even into detail, how they eliminate those hospitals and those babies. And I was there, because I was there till the last minute, until I was sent to this concentration camp. When I came to Krakow Plaszow, to this camp, I was assigned to work again in a machine shop. And if you saw Schindler's List, the movie, you saw a man making hinges. I was working in the same shop making handcuffs for the Gestapo. Conditions in this camp were also too, I can again say that Spielberg showed quite a bit because our commandant was Armand Gerd. And you saw in the movie, if you saw the movie, you saw he was a bloodthirsty man. Every day there were executions by shooting, hanging, and all kind of harassment. When while I was working in this shop, one day came a Jewish policeman and capo and called my name and ordered me to go to my barrack, take any belongings I still have, and report on a police station. That's the way actually the selections were made. They were going through various shops, rounding out people, and then taking them on a spot and shooting them. In this camp, we didn't have a crematorium and we didn't have gas chambers. All the executions were done by shooting or by hanging. Well, which one day, as I said, I had to follow the order when he didn't want to tell me what's going to happen to me, but I went to the barrack and brought whatever I still little thing had, came to the police station, and there were about 40 people assembled over there. They put us on a truck and we left the camp, not knowing where we are going. However, the ride was very short because about 10 miles from this camp was a sub-camp established by Schindler, and this was the Schindler's factory. And this was my lucky day. I was sent to Schindler's factory. How my name came up, I don't know. I have a few assumptions, but really I don't know how it happened. But I was lucky because when I came to Schindler's factory, it was like day and night. Schindler, let me tell you a little bit about Schindler. He was born in Czechoslovakia. He became a member of the Nazi Party when Hitler occupied Czechoslovakia. When Hitler occupied Poland, he came to Poland in order to seek fortune. Whatever you hear about Schindler, or maybe you read about it, that he was a money-hungry man, manipulator, womanizer, briber, everything is true. He was doing all those things. But with all those things, he managed to save over 1,000 Jews. Well, when I came over there, again, I was assigned to a machine shop. When he came, by the way, when he came over, he took over a Jewish factory which was manufacturing pots and pans, enamel pots and pans. And this was was a very good item for black market. He met some Jews which advised him that this is a good factory and he can make a lot of money. He started with a small group of Jews who actually were coming still from ghetto. They coming to his, like I was going to other factory working as a machinist, some Jews were going to his factory in order to manufacture pots and pans. Jews was very cheap labor. We didn't get paid. The only thing we got is some food, and that's about all. So he was making very good money, and gradually, in order to make more production, he was getting more people and more. Also, he had to bribe some authority in order to do it. When I came to his factory, he knew, but he was very smart. He knew that the pots and pans is not a good item to fight the war. You cannot fight war with pots and pans. So what he did, he convinced some authority that he will establish a munition department. And that's where I came to the factory, and we start tooling some tools in order to draw shells for the army. That's how he got more people into it. And then while I was working over there, and I came to Schindler's factory in this was early in 1943, middle of 43, after the liquidation of the ghetto. And then we were working over there, however, in 1944, in summer of 44, when the Russian army were coming closer to Krakow, the Nazis decided to liquidate all the camps and the factories and send the Jewish people into Germany. At that time, Schindler decided that the munition department of the factory, he will move from Krakow to Brno, Czechoslovakia. And that's the time where Schindler's List was actually established. What he did, he made up the list of his 1,000 people. He had, at that time, 700 men and 300 women working for him. And he tried very hard to get the same people to be transferred to his factory in Czechoslovakia. I was one of them who liquidated this munition part of the factory. We put the heavy machinery on the trains, and we sent them to Czechoslovakia. After we finished the job, we were sent back to the concentration camp on a cemetery, and then from there the men were very shortly, because we were sent to a concentration camp, Gross-Rosen, which was again a horrible concentration camp. Luckily, again, we were in this camp only for about 2 weeks, because Schindler did everything possible to get as soon as possible to his people into Czechoslovakia. We came to Czechoslovakia. It was already about October of 1944. We disassembled a textile factory, what Schindler took over, and we reassembled his munition factory. We start producing over there. However, it was by the end of the war already. He had a lot of difficulties. So what happened, actually, that we couldn't produce good parts because he didn't have the good material. He didn't have all the chemicals and process developed. So what Schindler did, he was in pressure that he has people over there. He's not shipping anything. So he was going out to other factories what were making the same parts, buying them, bringing them into our factory. They were repacked under his name, and he was delivering them to the authorities. So here he said, look, my people are working, and I need them. How Schindler also operated, I can just give you one example what happened actually in Czechoslovakia in January of 1945. He found out that on the side track, not very far from the factory, there are few cattle cars with people in them. Because as I mentioned before, when the Nazis decided to liquidate all the camps in Poland, they were loading people, some on cattle cars, some on trucks, some were even driven by foot to get them as soon as possible away from the front into Germany. They didn't want to leave also any evidence that what they were doing with those people during the war. So the cattle cars were there in January, and we didn't know, nobody didn't bother to look into it, who is there, if that people are dead or alive or whatever it is. Schindler took a few people on the truck, and I was also one of them. We went and we tried to open the cattle cars, and the cattle car has a big door with wheels on it, and they were frozen. It was winter, the moisture was coming out, and we had quite a job to open the cars. Finally, we did open, and what we found out, most people were dead, skeletons. Some people were still alive. They were not fed, who knows for how long, so they were eating the flesh of the dead people. And even when we tried to remove those alive people from the cattle cars, we had problem because they were frozen right to the wall of the cars, and the flesh was pulling, tearing. Finally, we got some people in. What Schindler did, he took them into the camp, took one barrack, established a hospital, and at that time, Mrs. Schindler was already with him, and they both were taking care of the people still alive to bring him back to life, and some, they survived the war. So the dead people, Schindler made sure that they were brought to cemetery and they were buried with dignity in a massive grave. Well, during the time also, by the end of the war, there were very little supplies, so even for the Nazis, for the Germans, the supplies were very short. So Schindler, knowing the territory, he was going out and buying food on the black market in order to feed us. Once he even found out that there's a dead horse in the field, he brought the horse into the camp, so we had some meat, extra food. He did everything possible to make condition better. And if you saw the movie, it was quite accurate, very well done and quite accurate. Before the liberation, by the way, our commandant in Czechoslovakia was not